What happens when the hype surrounding a fighter is so big, anything but greatness is a disappointment? That is what happened to Sage Northcutt, an MMA prodigy who had it all: speed, skill, and charisma that could light up an arena. By 19, he was already a UFC superstar and was being hailed as the future of the sport. Fans, sponsors, and the media couldn't get enough of him. But this is MMA we're talking about, probably the most brutal sport out there. And Sage found its brutality firsthand with a punch so bad it shattered the bones in his face. So, what happened and what went wrong? Well, let's find out. To understand Sage Northcutt, you've got to start at the very beginning. Born on March 1st, 1996 in Katy, Texas, Sage entered the world with a name as unique as his story would become: Sage Monroe Northcutt. It has a ring to it, doesn't it? Almost like destiny was setting him up for greatness from day one. Now, Katy isn't exactly known as the birthplace of MMA legends, but the Northcutt household was a world of its own. Sage's father, Mark Northcutt, was a competitive bodybuilder with a passion for martial arts. He was Sage's coach, mentor, and, let's be honest, a bit of a drill sergeant. Mark's approach to parenting was not for the faint of heart. While most kids were riding bikes or kicking soccer balls around, Sage was learning how to throw spinning back kicks and perfect his karate stances. By the time he was 4, he wasn't just dabbling in martial arts, he was immersed in it. Training wasn't optional, it was life. Sage's childhood was anything but ordinary. While other kids were spending their Saturdays watching cartoons, Sage was competing in karate tournaments. By the age of 9, he was dominating the competitive karate scene, collecting medals and trophies like they were Halloween candy. And we're not talking about small-time competitions either. Sage competed on the world stage, racking up 11 world championships in sport karate. 11. To put that into perspective, most people don't even win one world championship in their lifetime. Sage was making it look easy before he even hit his teenage years. But what really made Sage stand out wasn't just his skill, it was the way that he carried himself. Even as a kid, he had this magnetic energy about him. He wasn't just winning tournaments, he was putting on a show. Fans loved him, and opponents respected him. He had this uncanny ability to light up a room, whether he was throwing kicks on the mat or flashing that signature grin during interviews. Having a father like Mark helped Sage achieve an undeniable work ethic. Sage wasn't the kind of kid who sat around playing video games or scrolling through social media. He was in the gym, training for hours on end, pushing his limits every single day. His dedication was unreal, and it is what set him apart from the pack. By the time Sage transitioned to MMA, he was already a star in his own right. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a phenomenon. But as we all know, MMA is a whole different beast. And for Sage, the journey was only just beginning. Fast forward to 2015. Sage was 19 years old, undefeated in his MMA career and already turning heads in the fight world. But the moment that changed everything came when Dana White saw him in action on the reality show Looking for a Fight. Now, if you've ever watched the show, you know that Dana isn't exactly easy to impress. But when he saw Sage, it was like a light bulb went off. Dana didn't just see a fighter, he saw a star in the making. Dana didn't hold back his excitement, calling Sage the future of MMA. A statement that put a huge chip on Sage's shoulder.
When the fights ended, Sage was the kid that I was really focused on. He was talented, he was entertaining, and he's only 19 years old.
We got the pretty boy who thinks he wants to fight, man. That's exactly what I said. And then, you know, the whole everything, man, was legit. So, congratulations. Is that you?
And just like that, the UFC hype machine went into overdrive. Sage signed with the promotion, and in October 2015, he made his debut at UFC 192 in Houston, Texas. The pressure was immense. The first fight was Sage's chance to prove that he was the real deal. Spoiler alert, he delivered. Sage stepped into the octagon and absolutely lit up Francisco Trevino, securing a first-round TKO in just over a minute. This win was a statement that Sage wasn't just good, He was special. The crowd erupted, the commentators couldn't stop raving, and social media went wild. From there, Sage's career took off like a rocket. He became a staple of UFC highlight reels. His face was plastered across promotional material, and his fan base grew with every fight. Sponsors lined up to get a piece of the action, and Sage found himself in the spotlight like never before. But while the world was busy celebrating Sage's success, the fight game was quietly preparing to test him. You see, Sage's early UFC run was a dream come true. 3 wins, an undefeated record, and a growing fan base that couldn't get enough of his electrifying performances. But beneath the surface, there were cracks in the foundation. Now let's be real for a second. Sage's striking was phenomenal. His speed, power, and creativity made him a nightmare on the feet. But in MMA, elite striking just isn't enough. MMA is about being well-rounded, and Sage's grappling was, well, a work in progress. The first real test of Sage's career came in January 2016, when he faced Bryan Barberena. Now, Barberena wasn't the kind of guy who cared about hype or marketability. He was a grinder, a tough-as-nails veteran who had been through wars in the cage. For him, the fight started like many of Sage's previous bouts. He came out strong, throwing crisp strikes and using his athleticism to control the pace. Messy. By the second round, it was clear that Sage was in trouble. Barberena controlled him on the ground and eventually locked in an arm triangle choke. Sage tapped, and Boy had his first loss. The MMA world didn't hold back. Critics pointed out the glaring holes in Sage's ground game, while fans debated whether he had been pushed too fast, too soon. For Sage, it was a humbling moment, a wake-up call that the path to greatness wouldn't be as smooth as it seemed. For Sage, the loss to Bryan Barberena was a bitter pill to swallow, but he didn't let it break him. In typical Sage fashion, he approached the setback with his trademark optimism. In interviews after the fight, he said things like, "This is just part of the journey, and I'll come back better and stronger." And for a moment, it seemed like the world believed him. After all, plenty of fighters take an early loss and bounce back to become champions. But the thing about MMA is that it doesn't give you time to breathe. It is a sport that demands immediate answers. Can you fix your weaknesses? Can you evolve fast enough to stay relevant? These were the questions hanging over Sage's head as he prepared for his next fight. Later that same year, Sage faced Mickey Gall, a rising star in his own right. Gall had burst onto the scene by calling out CM Punk and submitting him in brutal fashion. And now he was hungry to prove himself against a high-profile opponent. Sage, with his boyish charm and superstar potential, was the perfect target. The fight between Sage and Gall wasn't just a clash of fighters, it was a clash of styles. Gall, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist, knew exactly what he needed to do to win. For Sage, it was another chance to show the world that he could handle adversity and silence the critics who doubted his grappling skills. Unfortunately, it was clear that he wasn't interested in trading strikes. He shot for takedowns, told about the narrative that began to form around Sage. Fans and analysts started saying things like, "Maybe he's just not ready for this level," or "The UFC rushed him too quickly." Even Dana White, who had been Sage's biggest cheerleader, started tempering his praise. Sage didn't let the negativity get to him, or at least he didn't show it. He kept training, kept smiling, and kept telling everyone who would listen that his best days were still ahead. But in the world of MMA, perception is everything, and once the fans start doubting you, the climb back to the top becomes that much steeper. By 2018, Sage's UFC run had reached a crossroads. He had notched a few more wins, but the losses to Barberena and Gall still loomed large in the minds of fans and analysts. When his UFC contract came up for renewal, the organization made a surprising decision. They didn't offer him a new deal. On the surface, it seemed like the UFC was cutting ties with Sage, but behind the scenes, it was more of a mutual parting. The UFC wanted fighters who could consistently compete at the highest level, and Sage wanted a fresh start. one where he could grow without the relentless pressure of being the next big thing. Enter ONE Championship. Now, for those unfamiliar, ONE is Asia's largest MMA promotion, known for its unique approach to the sport. Unlike the UFC, which thrives on trash talk and rivalries, ONE emphasizes respect, honor, and the traditional values of martial arts. It is a promotion that celebrates athletes, not just for their skills, but for their character, and Sage seemed like a perfect fit. ONE saw in Sage an opportunity to expand their brand into the Western market. With his clean-cut image, international appeal, and undeniable potential, Sage was exactly the kind of fighter they needed to make waves on a global scale. So they made him an offer that he couldn't refuse: a multi-fight, 7-figure contract that positioned him as one of their marquee stars. For Sage, this was a dream come true. Not only was he getting a chance to reinvent himself, but he was also joining a promotion that valued his personality as much as his performance. To prepare for this new chapter, Sage relocated to Singapore, where he joined Evolve MMA, a world-renowned gym with a roster of elite fighters and coaches. At Evolve, Sage threw himself into his training with the same intensity that had defined his entire career. Surrounded by champions from disciplines like Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and wrestling, he focused on shoring up the weaknesses that had plagued him in the UFC. For the first time in years, he was out of the spotlight, free to focus on his growth without the constant scrutiny of fans and media. But as exciting as this fresh start was, it also came with immense pressure. Sage wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting to prove that he still belonged among the sport's elite. And when ONE announced his debut opponent, it became clear that this wasn't going to be an easy road. May 17th, 2019. Sage Northcutt made his debut in ONE Championship. Fans, analysts, and even Sage's critics were eager to see how he would perform on this new stage. But when the matchup was announced, there was an audible gasp across the MMA community. Sage's opponent would be Cosmo Alexandre. Now, if you don't know who Cosmo Alexandre is, let me paint a picture for you. He is a 6'2" Brazilian powerhouse with over 70 professional kickboxing victories and multiple world championships in Muay Thai. At 37 years old, Cosmo was as experienced as he was dangerous. His striking was lethal, his timing was impeccable, and his resume was the stuff of nightmares for a young fighter making his debut.
That fight played out realistically. Like, not that it's better for him or worse for him, but Sage is a young guy. He's 21 or 22 years old. Mm-hmm. He's got a limited amount of world-class Muay Thai experience. He fought Cosmo, who was a multiple-time world champion.
Yeah.
If I was in Sage's corner, I'd go, hey, bro, there's a lot of fights we should take.
From the moment the fight began, it was clear that Sage was in for a challenge. He tried to stay light on his feet, using his speed and athleticism to create distance. But Cosmo wasn't playing around. He stalked Sage, cutting off angles and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came just 29 seconds into the first round. Cosmo landed a right hand that connected with devastating precision, sending Sage crashing to the canvas. The crowd fell silent. The referee waved off the fight. And just like that, Sage's highly anticipated debut ended in heartbreak. But the loss was only the beginning of Sage's troubles. The punch didn't just knock him out, it shattered his face. Sage suffered 8 facial fractures, requiring a 9-hour surgery to repair. Titanium plates were inserted to reconstruct his cheek and jaw, and the recovery process was long, painful, and uncertain. For Sage, this wasn't just a career setback. It was a life-altering moment. The fighter who had once seemed invincible was now facing questions about his future, his health, and his ability to return to the sport that he loved. The months following the Cosmo Alexandre fight were some of the most challenging of Sage's life. Physically, the recovery was grueling. Eating solid food was out of the question for weeks. and the pain from the surgery was a constant reminder of the fight. But the mental toll was perhaps even greater. Sage has always been the guy who bounced back from setbacks with a smile, but this time was different. The injury was a reminder of the risks involved in MMA, and the road to recovery was filled with doubts and fears. Would he ever fight again? Would he be the same? Could he still compete at the highest level? But if there's one thing that Sage has always been known for, it is his resilience. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild himself. He returned to the gym, taking things one step at a time. Social media became a window into his journey as he shared updates with his fans and thanked them for their unwavering support. Rebuilding from a devastating injury like the one that Sage suffered is no small feat. The physical pain alone was immense. Imagine 8 fractures across your face, each one a reminder of a single punch that derailed everything you had worked for. The recovery process required not only 9 hours of surgery, but weeks of immobility, restricted movement, and constant checkups to monitor his progress. Eating became a challenge. Even smiling, the trademark expression that defined Sage's public persona, was painful. But for Sage, the real battle wasn't just physical, it was mental. The psychological weight of that loss loomed large. Fighters are wired to have short memories about their defeats, but when your defeat comes with 8 fractures and public scrutiny, it's not so easy to shake off. Sage had to confront the fear that every fighter dreads, the possibility that they might not come back the same, or worse, they might not come back at all. For weeks, Sage disappeared from the public eye. Fans speculated about his future, with some even wondering if he'd announce his retirement. After all, Sage had already achieved more by the age of 23 than most fighters do in their entire careers. But quietly, behind the scenes, Sage was doing what he does best, putting in the work. His father, Mark Northcutt, played an important role during this time. If there is one thing that the Northcutt family is known for, it is their unwavering belief in Sage's potential. Mark became more than just a coach. He became Sage's emotional anchor, reminding him of why he started this journey in the first place. Together, they devised a plan to get Sage back on track, step by step, without rushing the process. Sage started with the basics, regaining mobility in his face, easing back into light workouts, and slowly rebuilding his strength. At first, it was frustrating. The explosive athlete who once seemed invincible now had to move cautiously, constantly aware of his body's limitations. But Sage approached the challenge with his trademark positivity. In interviews, he'd say things like, "I'm just grateful to be alive and healthy, and this is just another challenge for me to overcome." And then, bit by bit, the old Sage began to reemerge. Videos started surfacing on social media of him hitting pads, his movements crisp and fluid. Fans rallied behind him, flooding his posts with messages of support and encouragement. "You've got this, Sage," became a common refrain in his comments section. And for Sage, those words meant the world. By late 2020, Sage was back in full training mode, working not just on his striking, but on the areas of his game that had been criticized during his UFC run. Grappling, in particular, became a major focus. Sage began training with some of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners in the world, determined to turn his perceived weakness into a strength. But while the physical side of his comeback was progressing smoothly, there was still the mental hurdle of returning to the cage. Every fighter who suffers a devastating KO faces this challenge, the lingering fear of it happening again. Sage knew that the only way to overcome this fear was to face it head on. While Sage was rebuilding himself, the MMA world continued to evolve. New stars emerged, rivalries captivated fans, and the sport's relentless pace didn't slow down for anyone, not even a prodigy like Sage Northcutt. The lightweight and welterweight divisions in both the UFC and ONE Championship were more stacked than ever. fighters like Kamaru Usman, Israel Adesanya, Charles Oliveira, and others dominated headlines, while rising prospects made their cases for future stardom. The fight game is as much about timing as it is about talent, and for Sage, the clock was ticking. Critics began to speculate about Sage's future. Some questioned whether he still had the fire to compete at the highest level. Others argued that his injury was a sign that he was never cut out for the brutal world of professional MMA. But Sage wasn't paying attention to the noise. His focus was solely on himself, on becoming the best version of the fighter he knew he could be. By 2021, whispers of Sage's return began to circulate. He started posting more frequently on social media, sharing clips of his training sessions and updates on his recovery. In one video, he was seen grappling with a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, showcasing the progress he'd made in an area that had once been considered a weakness. Fans were thrilled. The comments flooded in. "We can't wait to see you back in the cage. The comeback is going to be epic." Sage, ever the optimist, responded with the messages of gratitude, thanking his supporters for sticking with him through the tough times. But the question remained: when would Sage return? And more importantly, how would he perform when he did? The MMA world is notoriously unforgiving, and the stakes for Sage's comeback couldn't have been higher.
Was there any time, and obviously we know what happened in that fight and a brutal injury that you had to overcome, but was there any point where you thought maybe you just won't come back? Like, life is good, you don't miss it, maybe I just won't do this anymore. Was that ever a consideration?
No, not really. After my fight, like even right afterwards, that same very next day, I was already planning on coming back. It did take a little while, like as a lot of people know, like for about a year plus, I was just healing up. So that took a little bit of time for sure.
Sage managed to make his return to the octagon against the Pakistani fighter Ahmed Mushtaba at ONE FC, and surprisingly won via heel hook in the very first round.
First round heel hook submission. Who would have ever thought? How much work have you been putting on the mat in your time off, brother?
Man, my wrestling's improved a lot. I've been training with an incredible team. Uriah Faber right here, Fabio. My wrestling jiu-jitsu, it's improved drastically, so I feel like a complete fighter now.
Now, was this the new and improved version of Sage? Only time will tell. While he has only fought 2 times since 2019, many forget that Sage is still only 28 years old, only just reaching the prime of his career.